Welcome, magical ones, to an alchemical life where our mission is to liberate humanity from limitation and suffering and bring magic back to the world. One moment, one life, one heartbeat at a time. Hello, magical humans. Welcome to an alchemical life. My name is Kira, and I am your host. And I am here today with the amazing Jen Lighty, who is a sorceress of myth. I'm going to officially introduce her in a second. But I just wanted to say, I'm so excited to have you here. I encountered you in Keone Hanale's workshop, and I was so lit up from within when you started talking about reclaiming the myths of your ancestors. And I'm just really excited to have this conversation with you. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kira. Thank you. I mean, I'm just lit up at the thought of talking to you for the next hour or so. Yeah, it's exciting. Hopefully, I'm casting a spell with my storytelling sorcery abilities on the Wi-Fi right now. We're going to be able to. So
we've had some technical difficulties, guys.
Yeah.
All right. So for the official intro, Jennifer Lighty is a word dervish, a storyteller, writer, mentor, and body worker whose work is a vessel for grounding the mythic dimension in modern life. She is a conduit for helping others rebuild the bridge between imagination, intuition, and logic, so they operate from a sacred and holistic perspective. She lives on the Big Island in Hawaii, where she hosts myth medicine journeys in Kealakekua. Okay, thank you. Combining storytelling and art. In her mythic memoir, Pico, A Return to Dreaming, she reveals her story of remembering. Her latest offering, The Coracle, is an online mythic rite of passage carried on folktales and Hawaiian magic. She writes the Corpus Colossum Chronicles and also has a passion to reveal how myth and story can heal the divided brain and return humanity to a holistic perspective grounded in tolerance, peace, and wonder. That's you.
Yeah, that's me. Thanks it's always really something to hear somebody read something like that to you. It's just like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to take that in.
Yes.
That is me. Yeah.
That is 100%. Yeah, I was actually just on a podcast the other day and had the same experience when she read mine, so I know what you're talking about. So, oh my goodness, there's so many things I want to pick your brain about. Where do I want to start? I guess let's start with the power of myth and storytelling. And so the first thing that comes to me is if you wouldn't mind sharing with us when you fell in love with the power of myth and perhaps what that journey was like, what really drew you in. And since so much of your healing work is happening through the power of myth and story, I'm assuming it's been a very healing modality for you as well. And so I'd love to just hear a little bit about what that journey is like.
Great. I mean, this is one of those questions that could be a book. So, well, I'll start with, so I never had a moment where I realized what myth was, because I feel like I was just in it from the time I was a little child. I was really fortunate. I've had a mom and a dad that they read to me a lot. And I was, a lot of that reading was fairy tales. And then I grew up before the internet. There wasn't we did have TV, but there was no cable. I'm 57. So this is the early 70s. And, I lived not in the wilderness, but I just lived, close to nature. I was in the woods behind our house, those kind of things. And I feel like those images from myth, and I did see a few films when I was a kid in the early 70s, like the Disney version of Cinderella and Snow White and Sleeping Beauty. And those images were so powerful because we didn't have as much access to them, that I really feel like the fairy tales just penetrated my being at a really young age. And then I never lost that. And then in high school, I had an amazing English teacher that introduced me to the world of Greek mythology. And I remember just this is the greatest thing ever. It was my favorite class. And moving on from there, this is where I really bifurcated from mainstream consciousness and reality at 24. I went to college, like many Americans do, but at 24, I moved to this small island off the coast of Rhode Island. It's called Block Island. And it's when I say off the coast, you have to take an hour ferry there, and it's in the North Atlantic, and they get canceled a lot. So it's isolated. And I was really in that path. I just took like a different direction in my life at that point. And like I didn't have a job that made sense. I wasn't pursuing a career or anything. I was just living on an island in a community with people that were living in like the old way of the village. And at that point, my life really became like a fairy tale. It became mythic. And then through a long series of events, like ongoing over like 15 years probably, underwent what I would really call like an initiation by the land. And that's when like mythic consciousness really opened up for me and became my reality.
Wow, I love that. So I I actually was reading one of your articles and you talked about a story with a buck that you
Yeah.
encountered and like how that lit up sort of like helped you reconnect to magic. Um yeah, can you speak a little bit more? I'm so curious, like what kind of initiations, how other like, and maybe tell us the story of the buck, but also just like what kind of initiations were happening in those 15 years that really
Yeah.
opened you up.
Well, that's interesting. It's really interesting. So initiation in intact culture, where they were actual ceremonies that were held by elders to help young people go through this like necessary journey into like the depths of who they were through, into the underworld. And
Totally,
then
yeah.
and they were contained. And then when you moved out of it, you hopefully will have gained some kind of necessary spiritual information about your soul that will help you become like a human in service to your community. So when I use the word initiation, really wasn't like I had any ceremonies like that,
Totally, yeah.
but I went through these experiences and so a lot of what was happening to me was like, and I didn't know anything about initiation. So I was just following impulse. And a lot of that was like out of rebellion. Like I would say, like, I don't want that world. That world is ugly, the modern world. So I had a couple of winters where like I never went to the mainland. I couldn't like stand to even go in like the grocery store in the mainland, like Stop and Shop. It was so harsh. And it was like my skin was like so thin. So a lot of times it was like my emotions that were like leading me into what I'm going to say was like initiatory journey. And a lot of that was really guided by depression, like intense depression. Um, and so I'm just leading a normal life. Like I'm not going around like getting initiated by like any people or even trying. But I feel like the power of initiation is so hardwired into like the human experience that it just happened to me because I took myself out of normal reality. I put myself on this island and like I had a job, like I worked normal. I had a normal life. Like I'm still supporting myself. I wasn't like living in a hut, like foraging my own food. I did do a lot of those kind of things. But like I noticed as the more connected I got in this journey, the more the natural world opened up to me. And, and it was just those ways that things that catch your attention. Like one year, all of a sudden I was like, I want to be a plant forager. And I was all over the island, everywhere, like learning. I'm like, I can't believe I lived here for 10 years and I didn't know that there are all these edible plants here. So, it
Mm.
was those kind of things. So, and then different kinds of animals will come to me through different seasons, of my life. For a long time, it was birds. Like everywhere I would go, there would be like a bird feather on the ground in front of me from different birds. Or I'd be finding wings. And then the deer were like a big part of that, like I mentioned. And then fish, like I got really into spearfishing at one point. And I
Mm.
realized that it wasn't for me. I'm like, I loved catching fish, like I thought spearfishing was amazing and feeding my friends, but I realized like I was getting initiated into a relationship with an animal that our ancestors would have had through hunting. So I learned, like, in a sense, like as a spear fisherman, because it's so direct, you
Yeah.
learn to think like an animal. You're learning to like, I had to learn to think about like, okay, what is a striped bass going to do? How is it going to swim? Like, I was able to like understand like what tracking was. And then, after a while, I realized I just didn't want to do that anymore because I didn't want to kill fish anymore. And I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
stopped spearfishing. And I was like, because I learned it wasn't about killing the fish because I am a modern human and I have access to food in the grocery store. Um, and but the reason I was attracted to that is because that was the initiation into like shape shifting into another consciousness, into like an animal consciousness, and being held by the consciousness of, for me, it was a striped bass, which is a really beautiful fish that's common in waters in New England.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Okay.
I
Levels.
know. I told you. There's so much more. We only
There's so
just
much
begun.
more.
Yeah.
Wow. I guess there's like a couple of things I just want to highlight so that everybody like catches the magic of what you just said. What really called to me is that, well, there's a few things. One is obviously this is like so your like dharma or whatever term you want to call it, because I just love the way that your internal guidance system took you to an island, took you to a situation where these initiations happened, and you experience them by following your intuition and just kind of your sense of, it may not have felt like it at the time, but it sounds like a sense of play and wonder almost in, oh, I'm just going to go explore these plants, and I'm just going to learn how to spearfish, and I'm just going to, I'm just going to do these things. And I wanted to highlight that because I think sometimes we can kind of like complicate our life path and think we need to find it. And what I'm really hearing in your story, and you can tell me if this resonates, on this side, it sounds like your life path in many ways just like emerged.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I did always have a really strong pull to be a writer from when I was a really little kid. And that was a thread. So all of these years that I'm on Block Island, really not looking like I'm doing anything, I was writing all the time, and but it wasn't like, I mean, I got some things published here and there, but it wasn't like anything impressive, like, and I wasn't trying to like make a career out of it, but that was a thread. And Block Island's small, so people knew, oh, she's a writer. I had that a little bit of identity. But the thing I feel like so blessed about, so Block Island is like this place that everybody who lives there because they love it. Like they choose to live there. And there's really like, I mean, I guess there's a few people, I can't generalize. There's probably a few people are like, oh, get me off this rock. But it's the kind of place where your career, you're not judged by your career there. And I never felt like, because I had jobs, look back, it's like I had a master's degree, like I had jobs and I wasn't, that didn't make sense in the terms of like the outer world. I was like cleaning houses, I was like, cooking on a line cook. I was a gardener. I built stone walls. I worked in the oyster farm. I worked in the bee farm. I did so many things, and they were not about like, I was in this place where the pressure was off. Everybody just knew like, if you want to live on Block Island, because there's only seasonal tourism there. So it was like, if you want to live on Block Island, you've got to kind of, and you're not, rich, you've got to take the jobs that you can get. And there was no stigma about it. And I feel like people there just got it. It was so cool. And I was even more extreme than most people. I mean, there's a good sense of play there, but I was really willing to live with very, very little money and like not trying to build anything on a monetary level. Like I like just scrape by for like 20 years. I would like caretake or house watch. I lived in tents. I lived in buses. I was just like, because I wanted to have that. It wasn't like I wanted to be like a slacker, but I didn't want to have my time consumed by work. So I was willing to like live in the cracks for like a long time in order to have this freedom of time that you're talking about. And in that time, I was, like playing, like I was just wandering all over this beautiful island, like walking, riding a bike, swimming, just really being with nature in a really, I love that word playful. I never thought of it that way, but it's really beautiful. I love that you said that. I'm going to own that. Yeah.
Totally. It's like, man, you just like for like 15 years, which is honestly such a revolutionary act in our culture to step away, especially in that time frame, because it was worse than it is now. I think, like that you should go to college, you should get a job, you should have a career.
Well, yeah, this is like I came of age in the 80s. Yeah. Yeah.
So like you were like totally stepping out of all of the boxes. And I mean, to me, that seems like such a much more solid foundation for a life than to pursue a career for the first 15 years of your adulthood, because you not only did you, I mean, again, tell me, this is what I'm interpreting, so tell me if I'm wrong. But not only did you open up to this mythic, like otherworldly awareness and making connections, I mean, I definitely want to come back to the shape shifting thing. And so, like, all of this, like, magic is taking place on the inside of you. And that's a time to, like, deeply get to know yourself that most people don't have, because they spend that time frame of their life pursuing a goal outside of themselves. And there's something really radically beautiful about the way that you were just like, fuck that, I'm I'm gonna live the life every day that I actually want to live every day. I'm not gonna spend my time chasing a goal that somebody else tells me I should have.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you definitely articulated that. And it's like, and I'm sure too, it wasn't always easy because a lot of
Totally.
this was motivated by like the inner turmoil, and like there was a lot of depression involved in this whole
Yeah.
narrative. It wasn't like woo all the time, but also, there was like a lot of joy and play and community. Like the relationships I have with the people in this community are it's really rare to have relationships like that in the modern world.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's this awesome storyteller named Martin Shaw who a lot of your audience probably knows about. He wrote something recently about the difference between a community and a network. And he said, like, a community, there might be a lot of goodwill and good intention in a network and even a lot of genuine affection, but a community has like room for everybody in it. And he said in particular, like two roles, the wanderer and the fool. And that's
Wow.
what Block Island was really like, because I was interacting with everybody and there were all walks of life that I love Hawaii and I love the people in my life now, but I don't have that same kind of interaction with everybody. Like it's definitely like filtered out in this part of my life. But at that point in my life, I was like in bars, hanging out with like, toothless people like that had really hard lives, or people that were, like, had like really alcoholics or like mental illness that I don't encounter now. And then people, because it was an island, some like romantic sailor would like come in for the week, because that's the wanderer figure, so
Wow.
it was really like, it was so unique. So,
Mm. So beautiful. One of the other things that really caught my attention was the whole initiation. I wanted to come back to this. Like, you
sure.
spoke to initiation, and I don't know how far you want to go into this, but like it sounds like a lot of your initiations happened through the depression that you were experiencing.
Yes.
Which I myself have experienced depression, or at least what felt like it to me. I don't know if it was clinical because I was still getting up and doing things, but I know that really, really low feeling, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and what I think is so beautiful that you identified is like we don't have the culture anymore, maybe to our detriment, that naturally puts us through some sort of an initiation before we enter adulthood. Because ideally that would be when you do hit those points in yourself that are depressed or anxious or, full of fear, or like whatever your particular shadows happen to be. So yeah, I'm just curious, like, if there's anything else you want to share about the depression and like how that, because there's so many people out there that struggle with these kind of emotions and mental conditions, and there's so much shame around it, but it's actually such a natural part of the human experience. It is the initiation oftentimes to the
Yeah.
expanded states.
I love this question. And I want to be really delicate and sensitive around it because I feel like it's very complex. And I think
Yeah.
for me, like the depression operated on so many different levels that, it's like I had a history of depression in my genetic line. So, I had the biological setup for it. And I I was in I probably was clinically depressed. I was encouraged to take medication and I never would. I did have like, suicidal ideation. Like it was a fine line sometimes. Um, but what I really believe is that depression in our time, well, first of all, it's a natural reaction in our time, that in the modern society, which is so soulless, to be depressed. I see that. Like we're confronted with like horrifying circumstances. And then I also can see how, for me, like depression was the call to the underworld journey that would have happened in an initiation if I was in an intact culture. And the depression is what, I mean, just I can demonstrate this really concretely with like just a little story. So, I go to college. I worked in a esoteric bookstore all through college, which is really interesting alternative education along with my formal education in literature. And then the year after college, I'm still working in the bookstore for $6.75 an hour, living in Washington, D.C. Like you can imagine, I was like, sleeping on a basement floor kind of thing. It was like low budget. And at the end of the year, I was just getting more and more depressed. And my dad called me up and he said, why don't you go to Block? They were trying to help me out. He's like, why don't you go to Block Island for the summer? Because we had gone there when I was a little kid and my aunt and uncle still had a home there. And he came down and got me. Like, that's how my parents knew, like, I was not in a good space. He drove down from Connecticut and got me and drove me and my cat and like all of my stuff to Block Island. And that's where the whole journey unfolded. The depression just got worse from there on, to be honest. And it led to like other things, like my original, experience that I talk about in my book, Pico, of like really going into like the underworld. My first time on the Big Island, in Moko'ikeawe. And, but I feel like in our time, the point I'm trying to make is like in our time, initiation is going to find us. Like the call of the underworld cannot be avoided. And depression is one of the ways that, you think about depression, physically, like you can't get up. That's the underworld journey is like a necessary part of becoming, I like the word full spectrum human.
I love that. Yeah. So why do you think that is in our modern culture that initiation will find us? I mean, may just simply be because we're not, I love the term that you use, an intact culture.
Mm-hmm.
Because so many of the cultures in our world have just been cut to pieces,
Yeah.
But I'm curious, just in your own words, like, why do you believe that initiation must find us?
Cool. Yeah, I do want to clarify that when I'm talking about the intact culture, and this is a word I've heard like other mythologists and storytellers use recently. Well, I'm really referring to like the cultures that are still receiving their instructions from nature, like their instructions on how to govern themselves. And that's what, like the word indigenous is used a lot, but there's people are kind of shifting to use the word intact now.
Okay.
In the mythology worms. So it's like they're still getting, knowing how to live and operate as humans with the instructions coming from nature. And I feel like initiation finds us because, well, this even just, because you and I share the experience of working with Brother Keone. So he talks about Aloha Ma, and of aloha being the culmination of every possible emotional quality or experience on earth, including the dark and hard ones. And the purpose of being human is to move through every single one of those experiences until you until you transcend. And that's aloha. So it's like we aren't just randomly here on earth. We're here because we've chosen to come in and participate in being a human and going through this journey. And we have to go through every one of these experiences on the emotional spectrum. And that's what initiation does. It brings you through the experiences. So we can't avoid it. Yeah. And if we don't do it individually, it moves out of us into like larger realms, like of cultures and countries. And those things take us up in them. Like, like you can look at like, if we're not doing our work as individuals held within the communities that have, an intact way of being, it's going to filter out into the outer world, and the outer world's going to take us down. And that's why, we have like mass underworld journeys happening on our planet now, which is, like the COVID pandemic. I can see that way. And you can see the spread of war on the planet as a certain way in that way too. It's like an outward manifestation of this work that we're failing to do on the inner level.
Wow. That speaks to so much, both on a personal level and on a collective level. Like, I really want to highlight for everyone what you said about Aloha Ma and it being like it is love, right? It's self-reflective love, but love includes all of those emotions, all of that experience. And somewhere in our, maybe this is kind of going to kind of pivot us to the myth and stories, because I think our myths and stories somewhere like started giving us the idea that we weren't supposed to experience the dark. It's really kind of a puzzle, I guess, of like, how did that actually get into our psyche as a collective, that all of these negative experiences or darker experiences should be avoided, when if you go back to like the original stories, they're dark as heck. you
Yeah.
know like it's some really bad stuff happening. Grimm's fairy tales were grim. So yeah, I'm curious your take on that. Like, where do you think we got the idea that certain experiences are not part of the human experience, or should not be part of the human experience? Because what you're speaking to so eloquently is that they all are and always will be. And I think if we really, really embrace that, then that gets rid of shame, because there's so much shame that comes when you feel like you're experiencing something that you shouldn't be.
Oh yeah.
Does that
I
make
mean, I've totally experienced that as a person um, through chronic illness of not being able to like heal myself. So I get that. But I want to focus on your question because I don't know. I love when somebody asks me a question that I actually don't have an answer to. And I'm like, oh, we're gonna have to talk our way into this answer. That excites me. So thank you. But I think like for me, it's like my immediate hit, like when you started talking about that, is that it has something to do with like the capitalism
mm-hmm.
and the idea and really like and America, maybe even America in general. And at this point, America is an idea as well that's spread across the whole planet. So, but the idea of like the pursuit of happiness is right in the is it the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution? I think it's the Declaration: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And like, I'm not against happiness, but there's something about like the project of America that is, and America, here I am just making stuff up. I'm talking this out. So this may not be true, but I'm going to say it. But America and the spiritual community that you're talking about, that is the community that focuses on love and light, was founded in America. America was founded at the expense of the genocide of the indigenous people that were already here, and on the backs on the genocide and the lie of African slaves.
Totally. Yeah.
So I think the legacy of so much of America is like not wanting to look at that and deal with like the collective reckoning. That's a collective shadow of American culture.
Yes.
And that is ongoing. Like, it's still like, you and I live in Hawaii, we're like we're colonizers here. And it doesn't mean we can't be here, but we're part of, it's like there's some kind of reckoning. For me, I'm always looking, I'm okay, why am I really here? And like checking in with that and like like listening for the way that I can be here as respectfully as I can.
100%, yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, I feel like Americans don't want to look at that because there is like a huge shame about our source as a nation. And then this culture developed out of it that was all about like, even though New Age culture or spiritual culture, I don't think did this consciously, but I feel like there's a big cultural reckoning that needs to happen in American culture in order to move us out of empire and capitalism, which isn't a life-sustaining force. It's extractive, and it's leading us to a point on our planet where we're at risk of destroying human culture completely, human life, extincting ourselves, and then doing a lot of damage to other species as we go down.
Wow, you just unpacked a lot.
I know we gotta laugh to like you have to laugh to like relieve. Sometimes you just have to like, okay, like
right? Like, wow, that was deep. I honestly was not expecting this to go this way, but I'm so happy that it did. I'm so here for this conversation. There's a couple of things that you touched on that I just want to highlight. One, I just want to raise my hand and say, yes, I have the same struggle being in Hawaii and the whole colonizer. I'm a little more recent. I've only been here for like 3 months and then 6 months last year. But my intention is always to give back to the land as much as I can. And if she ever tells me to leave, because I do believe land is consciousness, which I'm sure you do as well, it sounds like.
Yeah.
If she ever tells me to leave, I'm out of here. You know, like, um, but it is, there's so much in what you just said about the way that America was founded, and which is interesting because that came from Europe. I'm curious your perspective on this, but we were already colonizing all over the place. And
Yes.
it does seem to have like developed a more extreme expression here that became interwoven with, how do I want to say this? I don't know. Would you say that America is really where capitalism was born?
Well, no, capitalism as a financial system arose in like the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance in Europe, as far as I know. But I think
Okay.
America, because there was this big space, open space, it just created that idea of like infinite progress. And also, Europe was really stratified by class systems. And in America, you could come here. Of course, we have class systems in America, but you know, the idea though is like you can make anybody can make it in America. It's the American dream. So it was sort of like
Mm-hmm.
this story that was programmed into America and Americans. It's still ongoing, although like it's kind of collapsing now. I don't think as many people believe in it. Is that America is the land of like hopes and dreams. And, you can make it if you work hard. You can make it there, and it doesn't. And that's the
Yeah.
most important thing. I do, and you know, I this is what you're just saying. So for me, one of the main things I'm really interested in, it's like first, it's like I'm holding a bunch of different levels of this. So like I'm really
Yeah.
aware of like how I'm a colonizer as in Hawaii and in general, just as a white person, you know, so those are things I think about a lot. And I'm trying to like hold that awareness. And I'm also being guided on a different level to go back to the very root of things, but not bypassing what's actually happening now. So when I go back to the very root of colonizing, I go back to like the beginning of the separation from nature, because
Mm.
that and by that I mean like the separation of like in European culture, which is that's my lineage, of when did Europeans separate from like their intactness, from getting their
Yeah.
cultural instructions from nature. So, and I have a lot of compassion for that. So all those people that came from Europe, you know, my ancestors that came from Europe, they did that because they had been colonized. First of all, most of them came for, you know, like religious freedom. Is why people, you know, my ancestors came a long time ago at the beginning of America, you know, before it was America. So they were all coming for religious freedom. So they were persecuted in Europe. But even before that, like it goes back really far. Like the roots of the colonization are deep. And that's
Yeah.
something I feel like we need to hold compassion for those of us with that ancestry, hold compassion for. And I would even ask for people that don't have that ancestry to hold compassion for us, you know, to
Totally.
see
Yeah.
like we've been, you know, like we've been colonized too. And it's really important for those of us that are active colonizers now, especially with white privilege, to not like bypass the work that has to happen now in order to like go to the root of resolving this. And you know, it may seem huge, it may seem like we can't ever resolve this in our lifetime. It doesn't matter. We've got to do that work on a lot of different levels, like the personal and the political, in order to resolve this for whatever comes after us.
Yeah. Wow. Um, so agree. So agree. I just want to say, like, I there's dual perspectives that you're highlighting so beautifully. Like, I think it is very often forgotten that before, I guess, was it the Romans before they came into to Europe, like they were really the ones that cut the druids and the priestesses and the, you know, the culture that was nature centric and was magical. There was an incredible culture and an incredible heritage, and then the Roman Catholic Church really swept it out of Europe. And and I think that's forgotten a lot of times, that our culture was lost too, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's a really, really beautiful reminder and a remembrance for those of us who do have that heritage. You know, I've in the last 3 or 4 years, like, I've done my best to connect back in with my own Celtic roots. And, you know, I haven't done a ton of research into it, probably not as much as you have, but um I'm mostly Welsh, Irish, Scottish, British, you know, English. Like, I have done like my blood work and all that kind of stuff. And so it's all over there. And I've done my best to like really start reconnecting to, okay, like what was that heritage before the Christian church really like took it out and made it made it its own thing. And so that's a really important reclamation, and also the awareness that like, okay, and this stops with me. Like, how do we stop procuring other people's culture for ourselves because we lost ours? And it's a really delicate balance. Uh, but I think you kind of started speaking to it in the one of the things you also said that I wanted to go back to is highlighting the spiritual community that's come out of capitalism. Yeah. Like that is actually one of my biggest passion points is I feel like we have a lot of people with good intentions. I don't believe that there's any ill intent, but I could be wrong, but it seems there's a lot of people who are trying to bring about new earth and new thinking and save humanity, you know, in a lot of ways. But the capitalism and the colonialism and the cultural appropriation is like so rife that we don't even see it. And so we're trying to build this new foundation, but we're still borrowing bricks from the past. So I know I just cracked open about 4 things, but I'm just curious
Yeah.
what's feeling alive for you right now.
Yeah. I mean, well, one, I do want to address what you just said because, like I used to be really frustrated because I didn't grow up with the internet. So I grew up, obviously, we're in a visual world and sight is the predominant sight for humans in our time,
Mm-hmm.
in a visual culture. I know in a print illiterate culture, oral culture, I don't think sight was different. Ears were the primary culture. But it's not like the past 20 years or so of the internet, or like even like the past 10 years, it's accelerating. But I feel like the power of the image now, and like I used to get mad. I'd be like, these people are making all this money because they're pretty and they're good at Instagram, things like that. Like, and
Yep.
now, I mean, but I also like didn't have um I didn't have a community at that point of people that were receiving what I offered. So I was like hampered by that. I was frustrated. Now that I have that, my perspective has really shifted to like a couple different things. One of them is like just a lot of compassion for people. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's also a lot of dismay. Like there's the ignorance because a lot of what's happening now is just out of ignorance, like you were saying. And I always wonder, I'm like, what's going on in America now that people don't know that this is like what history is valuable, or like knowing the history of things. Like the first time I came to Hawaii, I actually didn't know anything about Hawaiian culture besides what was fed to me by, images of like Elvis movies in the 1950s. And I was shocked. Like I didn't know that Hawaii had been illegally annexed by the US government. I didn't know about the history of colonization by the missionaries or by the plantation owners. I didn't know about the legacy of colonialism now, and I got a firsthand experience of it. And I remember I was just shocked. I was shocked, and it's like, why wasn't that part of American history? Why wasn't that taught? And I think it's only gotten worse. Of like why, like the people just don't seem to know anymore, and then they find an easy way. And also, I also have compassion because you've got to get ahead. Like you got to hustle in America for the most part just to pay your rent. Like I was really lucky. I had those 20 plus years on Block Island of just living outside of that, like finding the way to like live in between the cracks with very little money. So I didn't have to hustle, but now I'm like, I'm on the hustle now. Like, so I'm in a different,
You
but
live
it's
in
good.
Hawaii, you gotta hustle.
I'm doing things I want. So it's good. But, so I do have compassion for that. Like maybe there are people that don't have an intention that's pure, like I'm ascribing. Maybe it's a little more corrupt than you're thinking, but
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's just a lot of ignorance, and it does feel like it's getting worse. So that's why it's really important to have conversations like this and speak with people. I'd like to hear what you say about that. And I do have another thread that goes back off another thread that we can go another direction with too, that connects to the thing you said right before that. So
I love how this is becoming a co-thing. This is so great.
yeah, yeah.
What really stands out to me about what you said, well, there were several things, but like first, the ignorance, I think is Like, we don't know because we don't want to know. If you're an adult, if you're in school, you're getting the story that you're getting, and I'm sorry. Because I was in the same position when I moved here last year. Like, I remember when I found out how this island was procured, and then how it continued, and I was just horrified. I was like, oh my God, what is wrong with white people? I was on a hiking trail, and I actually said that. I was like, what is wrong with us? And also, like you said, like, there's the frustration that I was obviously feeling, and then there's the compassion of, gosh, there's some collective shadow, like you mentioned earlier, that we're just not looking at. And I don't even know if even those of us who are willing to have this conversation, if we've even identified it yet. Like, my gut sense is that the actual origins of, like, why we feel the need to possess everything rather than participate with it, is a little mysterious to me, except that the only thing I can track it back to historically is the Roman Catholic Church. And so that was done to us. And so perhaps that is just being carried forward, but I'm curious.
Okay, whew, see if I can do this. So for me, like my work, like my mission in life is really to go as deep as I can, as far back as I can. And like what I get and this is why I love Brother Keone, because he brings me back all the way. And some of that,
Years.
like through his lineage and also into my own remembering. And a lot of that, what has happened, and like when I say that, I'm not one of those people that's like seeing stuff in the Akashic records. I just know. It's just like I just know stuff. I'm not getting like movies of people in Atlantis, or I just want to make that clear. But like I know that what we're working with is like a deep, deep trauma in humanity, and I feel this has to do, because there's something you said about like why do white people, why do we have this need to possess, everywhere we go we're trying to possess everything, whether it's somebody's ideas or somebody's land. I feel that this has to do with like that original trauma of being like totally disconnected from an intact culture, which is receiving its instructions from nature. And those instructions from nature were about like from the great mother. So I'm talking about like severance from the feminine, which you and I know from working with Keone is where safety and belonging reside. So this is the kind of work I do in the Coracle, the myth program that I run with people. When you don't have that inner safety, you don't have belonging. And this only happens, when you can, I'm talking about safety that is exterior. It's separate from exterior conditions. Mm-hmm. Like that's for me what the feminine is. So we have this like historical separation from these cultures that were like grounded in the goddess, that go back to the very, it's like Çatalhöyük and like places in Europe, the Minoan civilizations. When I'm talking about the goddess, it's like the great mother, it's like the goddess. It's not Aphrodite. She hasn't split yet. So this is really ancient. This is really, it's before Roman Catholicism. It goes back, like through like the Roman Empire and the Greek Empire, like the Homeric Odyssey and all those times. And it's like a shift out of that culture has just translated into like a total divorce from the feminine that's been carried around the world by empire, like that, started moving like Western civilization, the empire, moving from like Rome to the British Empire, now the American Empire, which is like globalized the earth. So It's really like a huge lack of belonging. And that's why it's so painful to go through life like that people are reaching and grasping for anything they can to like fill up this huge, huge void. And that's where this desire to possess comes from.
Wow. That was epic. Thank you. Yeah, that feels very, very true in my bones, is that removal from our connection with the great mother, with earth, with nature. Zach Bush even talks about this a lot. I don't know if you've ever heard him, but he talks a lot about how we became orphans. Like at some point in history, we stopped identifying ourselves with the mother and we separated ourselves from the rest of nature. And even if you look in the dictionary, it's like animals and then humans, like humans, we're an animal, but it in the dictionary, like actually says all mammals except for humans, you know, which we wrote that, you know, like we've created that story that we aren't a part of the whole. And I love that you spoke to the truly ancient goddess cultures, like not what we think of as Aphrodite or any of these goddesses, because they just represented pieces. And a lot of those Greek, you know, Greek myths and Roman myths were written by, I mean, they definitely favored the men, you know, it favored the masculine and painted the feminine in a very specific way. And that's just really, it's beautiful. Our separation from the feminine has caused this separation from our safety and our belonging, which I want to give you a chance to to go the little direction you wanted to go. And then I'd love to bring us back to grounding. This is totally not what I thought we would talk about, but I'm loving it.
That's the way.
Grounding that safety and belonging for people, like maybe giving some real tangible things that people can begin to implement to maybe reconnect. Because I love for people to walk away with something that they can actually apply in their daily life, you know?
Sure, sure. Well, I think the thread I want to talk about is going to lead into that, but I want to say one thing, and
Okay.
this culture of like the great mother. And because I know that I think this is a really important piece of information that people could really use to like contemplate, or maybe even find some way to like, this is could be a takeaway. So I was actually part of a conference. It's still ongoing, called the Great Mother Conference, founded by the American poet Robert Bly. It's been going on for 52 years. I went for years before I moved here. And I don't know what culture they were referring to, but I remember hearing one of the presenters there talk about that the purpose of like initiation is to literally, so like, you know, as a child, your point of orientation are your parents, and particularly the mother. You come from the mother's body, and initiation severs you from the mother's body and then attaches you to the great mother.
Wow.
And so, and like that was, you know, so, and if we can have that, then we're not going to stay in these like unhealthy attachments. Think of the freedom. I'm not a mother, but like, think of the freedom that gives our birth mothers. You know, it's like, there's so much pain and trauma being passed down through the generations. And the mothers bears a lot of blame for this, I think. And like, we're not supposed to keep that energetic attachment to our birth mothers. We're supposed to attach to the great mother. And then from there, we become part of like this way of being that is getting instructions, that knows how to live in balance with Earth. And I know that's like the core principle of initiation. And this underworld journey that I talk about a lot, because it's one of the things that I lead people on, and because I experienced it so directly, is part of that process. But it's just a part of it. Like the real process is to like sever from the mother and reattach to the cosmic mother.
Ooh, that feels so true in my bones. Yeah, it's interesting. I've shared a little bit of my story here, and I probably will do an episode all on my own. But basically, I didn't leave my mom until I was 34. I think I mentioned this in one of the classes with Keone, but it was an abusive situation and narcissistic, and I just had no idea. I didn't leave till I was 34. So it's very fresh in my memory. Like when you speak about disconnecting from the mother and then reattaching yourself to the great mother, I can so viscerally feel that, because that's basically been the last 10 years of my life, is unwinding this and rediscovering my connection to the great mother as my source of nourishment, and to feel that that's safe even. And what's so beautiful that you're really highlighting is that's how it's meant to be. Like that is actually the process of maturing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, so many of our wounds coming through the mother line are they're just being passed down, because these separations, you know, this severance happened for people with European descent. It happened, you know, I would say probably around 3000 BCE, maybe even farther, but you know, it happened a long time ago. So I think there were like probably, you know, pockets, or always pockets of people that were like the Cathars, or, people that were still like the priestess of Mary Magdalene, or the Cathars, that were still like carrying the tradition of the Great Mother on. But in general, it's just been accumulated that like we've been staying connected to the physical mother, and it's like trauma going down through the generations. Like our mothers are traumatized by their mothers who were traumatized just because they didn't make this disconnection themselves. And now in our time, we're having this big awakening of people that are realizing this and like doing the work. And we have all these new fields in trauma therapy, especially with developmental trauma and CPTSD, which is really subtle, are coming forward now to help people unravel these wounds. And I only see that as like leading to like a larger cultural healing that gives me, even though the world looks dire, I still believe in the human event. And I believe that it's like human life is beautiful and good, and we can do this. Like I still have faith in humans because, I see this.
Yeah. I agree with you. I have delusional optimism.
Yeah.
Like, I do think like we're going to, at some point, there's going to be, it's like we're shifting, like consciousness is shifting and people are waking up. And at some point, there's going to be a tipping point to where that becomes the predominant energy on the planet, And when that happens, I think we will rediscover a lot of this ancient knowledge and way of being, and also be able to integrate it with what we've learned in the last 5,000 years, One of the things I love about Richard Rudd, you mentioned the Gene Keys earlier, like one of the things I love is his perspective is so obviously that like nothing is wrong. We haven't screwed up, It wasn't a big like mess up on the part of humanity. This was actually all the way we were meant to evolve. We just don't see the fullness yet of why.
Yeah, no, I love listening to Richard Rudd speak, and it's not just for what he's saying, it's because his nervous system is embodying what you just said. Like there's a deep calmness there that when he speaks, I'm like, yeah, like this, there's no mistakes here. This is what like a true acceptance of everything feels like. So like it's like a somatic experience that happens when I hear him speak. And I do believe that. And I do believe that like this isn't a mistake. Like I don't feel like you'll hear people talk about like we're a glitch or, we went off track and things. Like I actually don't believe that. And I haven't for a long time. And I'm also really willing to carry all the emotional journey as well. Because I feel like sometimes when I hear people say that, they're going too far into like the intellect. It's like a bypass. And I feel like it's important to like have the emotional perspective with the intellectual holding as well.
That's such a beautiful note, because I can even say I've done that in the past. Like if you're not, so what I hear you saying is if you're not willing to feel the emotions of the pain of the separation from the Great Mother, or the pain of having participated in colonization, or, or the grief or the sorrow or any of those kind of things, like if we're just trying to find a solution, but we don't actually feel our way through, then we actually won't evolve. Like we won't learn the lessons. Like if you're looking at humanity as a whole in this like massive initiation that you spoke of, we're gonna have to go into the shadow realms, which I hadn't really thought about till you just said that. But that puts some context to what's happening right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's like every now and then I'll have these flashes. It's like of like experiencing what it's like to be in like a dimension that's not human. And one of those things I think there's dimensions where there aren't emotions. Like we take them for granted because they just move through us all the time. But like what a gift it is to have emotions, to get to experience the emotional journey. And we take it for granted because it's, and like if we could shift our perspective to really understanding, and like people use the word the gift economy, like humans that live in balance, and they're still, are operating on the gift economy. And if we could understand that, like life, getting a body is part of the gift economy, and the getting to have emotions is like part of the gift economy, we're always going to be like moving and exchanging and giving, and we're not going to get stuck in them. But I think we have to like shift our perspective on emotions and really be willing to feel them all, because they exist. Like, they're not a mistake. They're not a mistake.
Yeah. Wow. So powerful. Did you get to ask your question? Did we cover it?
No. Well, I think I just wanted to just tease out a little bit, and this might, about the idea of like why I'm so into mythology and fairy tales. And I think we kind of hit it up, but I want to clarify it. It's like the fairy tales they're the wisdom for Europeans. That's our indigenous wisdom. That comes from like when our lineages as white Europeans were intact. And those stories preserve the like initiation tales in particular. Those are the ones I've really looked at. They preserve information of not only just how to enact the ceremonies of initiation that will bring you into this like separation from the human mother into reconnection with the great mother, but they also are like, hearing them is a ceremony. And that's why, and that's the work that I offer people now through these stories. So I just wanted and then I just want to say one more thing, because I was blown away when I realized this. So you and I were both in the Properties of Light Hala workshop with Keone recently. And I realized, like, through working with the magic, I don't know if you were in that a couple of years ago, he talked about the magic, new magic.
No,
but
I wish it was.
Yeah. So that's when I first got exposed to the properties of light and the principles of the oscillation of magic. But I realized all of those properties, all 9, because Keone's saying in light, science only recognizes 7, but they're 9. So we're like missing a lot, because we're missing revelation and completion, the alpha and the omega. So that's why our culture is like handicapped. They're in fairy tales. All 9 of them are in them. But like there was a point in Western culture where our people had access to the full spectrum of light. So I use these stories now as an activation to help people without cultural appropriation, because this is my lineage and most of the people I work with. Although honestly, because it goes back all the way to the Mu culture, which, according to Keone, is the original culture of humans on Earth. This technology, the spiritual technology, works for anybody. So, it's not like the stories are just for people of like white European heritage. This is a technology that's available in these stories, and it probably exists in stories from other cultures that I don't know about as well.
Yeah, that was actually what I thought we were going to do most of our talking about. So we may have to have part 2.
Okay.
Because
this is fun.
I want to go so deep into that. I saw you mention that in your article on magic, and I was like, wow. So can you just tell us like one example of a story that people would know, perhaps, that you found a property of light in, and kind of like unpack like what you mean by that?
Sure. Well, I'll talk about the Iron John, which is a story Keone invited me to present a bit of in the Hollow workshop. So Iron John has all 9 properties. So, and they're in other ones, but because the Iron John's an initiation story. So it was a story that was told in the culture in order to initiate people. Like, the hearing of the story is like initiates the inner processes, the inner alchemy for the people who originally received the story from nature. I mean, that's my take. Like, no one's ever said like fairy tales came from nature, but I just know they were. The same way that like, the Shipibos say that their Icaros that they sing in the ayahuasca medicine ceremonies come from the plants. Fairy tales come from nature. It's not like a human ever wrote these down, like thought like, oh, I'm going to be the author of Sleeping Beauty. So in Iron John, you can see each one of and I have an essay on my Substack where I trace them all out. But in the workshop with Keone, I spoke about reflection, which is the second property. And reflection has to do with like exposures. So I found this image in that story of like the boy that, the guy on the hero's journey, seeing his reflection in the water. And then what happens through there, like what spiritual information he gets from looking at his reflection that is the catalyst for his journey into the initiatory process that goes through all of the properties. And I have this big long article that traces all of them, if people want to take a look at that, called The Spiritual Technology of Fairy Tales, through Iron John. And that story is really known to a lot of people in the mythopoetic community in America, because it was one that was sort of the founding text of the mythopoetic men's movement, which Robert Bly started in the late 80s and early 90s. And it's been seen as a story about men's initiation, because it's got gendered males in it. And it's, as the protagonist. And it is a super valuable story for like a lot of men that I know. It's like really helped them to learn how to become men. But what I'm saying, it's like far beyond gender, like the process that's moving through that story. And that's the way that I've been presenting it to people, which is really fun, because I don't think anybody's ever looked at, in America that I know of, looked at the story through that lens before.
Wow. I love that. Thank you. Two things are standing out to me. One, I'm just really curious, since you just mentioned Sleeping Beauty, in the light of the whole conversation we just had about colonialism and, all of this, that the version of that story that got made by Disney now, I think, is being seen as, well, how do I want to say this? Seems like a lot of our fairy tales that involve women being rescued by princes, and, that was the grand dream, and they were helpless, and that's really being kind of like reconsidered as somewhat disempowering to women and that kind of thing. I'm curious, like, was there an original version of that story that was a little bit more empowering, or do you think that we're doing a disservice? And I'm using that as an example, but there's, Rapunzel and Snow White and, Cinderella, all of them, all the princess stories. Was there an original version that was different, or are we making it complicated? If that makes
So
sense.
yeah, no, I totally get it. There is a huge movement of reclaiming fairy tales in order to have more positive female role models. And I think that's important when you recognize that these stories that are being fed to people are an indoctrination, a cultural indoctrination. Like, I think a lot of people see like Snow White when they're a little kid, and then that makes them aspire to this certain thing.
Yes.
But what I think that is like, that's an over materialization of the stories. And there is like, I'm not interested in reclaiming the stories. I think the work is valuable though, because we do have gender disparity. It's real. It's real. But I do think that it does like kind of take away from the stories, I think, because the stories are not about gender, really. These images are way more primal, and they're describing interior states of the masculine and the feminine, and how that leads to the union, the wedding of the masculine and feminine, and the exaltation of what the Hawaiians call the amakua, which is the spirit. So I think that for me, it's not that interesting to like just stick to the political realm. And I also think it's important. But I think it's not about like dismissing Sleeping Beauty and saying that story's bullshit, women were disempowered. Like, absolutely not, because in the original time of that story, it wasn't, that's not what the story was being used as. It was being used as to like give information about like interior processes. And also there was cultural information in the stories for the people of the time too. It's not just all interior. I think like we can't like psychologize it too much.
Totally.
But it's more about like initiation rituals of the feminine and the masculine, I think, what's in the stories.
Wow. I really love that, actually. This is why I felt so guided to ask, because I knew you were going to have an answer that would change something in the way that I think. Because I wrestled with that. Like, I did grow up on these stories and have always, much like you, like super, super into myth, fables, just fairy tales, anything of that realm. I was very drawn to anything archetypal, And then as I began to like awaken spiritually recently, it's like, okay, but patriarchy and capitalism and, all these things are like woven in. And so it's been a little bit of interesting for me, and I'm sure for others out there. But what I really love that you just spoke to is if we can pull the lens back and see these stories as descriptive of the internal process within us and the union that happens within us, rather than the coming together of Snow White and her prince. It's your internal feminine and your internal masculine and the rites of passage that they go through, that feels so rich for contemplation. And yeah, it just gives a completely different direction to it. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for like bringing it. I told you I need specific questions. So
Yeah, that
if you
was
give me a
amazing.
specific question, I'm like a waterfall. But
Yeah. Okay, my
so,
last one, and then I want you to tell everybody about the Coracle and how to find you. Just back to this, if we can give people like a practical way or two to begin rewiring or reconnecting with that great mother and that safety and belonging, like what would you say? Obviously, we've talked about Keone so much. I'm actually going to link his website in the
yeah.
bottom because if you want, if you want to know about the 9 properties of light, for instance, like it's all there. And aside from that, yeah, what would be like 2 practical, like tangible ways, what or 2, whatever comes to you, that people can really begin to create that inner safety and that belonging that you were speaking of?
This is a big question.
Mm,
The first thing that comes to me is to make it as simple as possible, and that has to be physical.
mm,
Like the very simplest thing is just to find nature wherever you are
mm-hmm,
and be with it. And that can mean like I do a lot of like I wrote a whole book about doing this, like sitting in one spot every day
mm,
and in nature. Even if you live in a city, if like just find a weed or a tree or something, like in the sidewalk. And just the simplest thing,
yeah.
because then you're like opening up relationship through
Wow. Yeah.
attention. So it's like a focus of attention. Then the other thing that came to me was a sweat lodge.
Ooh.
So that, and not everyone's going to have access to that, but that is a ceremony that is literally, and it doesn't have to be, I personally don't think it has to be like the traditional Lakota sweat lodge. Although if you can find a ceremony that feels like good, that you can go into, and I would recommend that, you feel like it has integrity. Because
Yeah.
that ceremony is literally about going into the womb. And like,
Mm,
the first time I've been in a lodge many times, but I remember like that first time of going in and hearing the water pourers saying like, these stones, this is literally this lodge is your mother, is the great mother. These stones, this is like the fire is your brother. It's a real,
mm,
and it's really physical. It's really intense. If you've never been in one,
I
you'll
have.
find out. If you have, and that it's a physical thing.
Yeah.
So I guess really like my transformation started from like being in the world and being physical. Like this, my whole
Wow.
process, it wasn't like I didn't seek any of this. It all just happened because I was playing in nature, like you said. And some of that playing could have been like riding my bike to work, but I put myself in situations where I was just in nature. And I know I think that could be kind of vague, but
No, I think
um,
that's very, very helpful because as much as it may seem like a trendy thing to say now, like, oh, nature, because I think that's become a thing in the spiritual community, but it is actually true. And I've said this in my Substack. When I moved here last year, like I 100% know that reconnecting with this island, reconnecting with the land, I was going through complex PTSD, like a lot of like not great symptoms. I was not in a good place. And she healed me. Like she really did. I spent so much time walking and being by the ocean and just connecting as much as I could to the land. And it's true, like the more you connect with nature, it does start that relationship. I love the way that you said that, and miracles happen. I mean, it just starts to calm your nervous system. You just start to come down into the body. Yeah, and the sweat lodge is actually a very great. I've done that in Peru. Not I've never done the lineage that you spoke of, but I did it in Peru.
mhm.
And it's an initiation back to kind of like how we started this. Like, and maybe that's another thing people can consider is like putting yourself in difficult situations like that. Like that part of that is the physical discomfort.
Yeah.
And and when you put yourself in a place to be physically uncomfortable, you're initiating yourself in a way. And and that reconnection will like naturally happen. Yeah, this has been
Yeah.
so incredible.
For me too. I know it's just so
Oh
great talking to you. I knew it was going to be amazing. So enjoyable. We could go on for hours.
my gosh,
Yeah.
100%. I know. I definitely like, if you're willing, maybe we'll do another deep dive into magic, because I would really love to. I mean, that's my thing. Literally, the tagline
Yeah.
for this is liberating humanity and bringing magic back to the world. And that's where I
Yeah.
thought we would go. But I think we talked more about liberating humanity. Like,
Yeah.
it really went into some beautiful realms. So yeah, I just want to open the floor if there's anything that is, outstanding in your heart that you want to share, and also if you can share with people like how they can work with you and where to find you and all that kind of stuff.
I do. There is one more little thing I want to share, and that is like, I talk about going into nature, and I really, I'm not a
Mhm.
person that like gives advice really or tells people, but I want to say like, don't make this something transactional. Like don't make it about like taking the photo and putting it on Instagram. Like keep these experiences for like sacred. Think about it like, would you expose, don't, because there's just, don't make it transactional. Like keep it something between you and like what you're encountering. So this world of nature or whatever you're encountering knows that they can trust you. And then you're going to be able to like really behold and then be seen in that same way. You'll be beheld if you're
Mm.
lucky. Because it's like, I just feel like the impulse now, and it comes from this like deep sense of inadequacy that, we're not actually truly seen unless it's been like shared on social media now. Like, oh, I'm special. I've had this experience. We need to remove ourselves from that. Like that is hurting the natural world and it's hurting us. So I feel really strong. I can feel like, oh, I feel really strongly about this. And then also, if you can, offer something back.
Fire
Offer
right there.
something back. Offer something back. If you find yourself drawn to like a flower, tell the little flower how beautiful it is. Like recite it a poem, sing it a song, like give it a compliment. This is like the process of courtship. This is what courtship and romantic love in the medieval tradition was about. It wasn't about like getting the fine lady. It was about like courting the divine feminine in nature. That's what the troubadours were talking about in the 12th century. And it's like we need to like put yourself back in that position of the courtier and the suitor of the natural world. And I guarantee that things will open up for you in beautiful ways that will benefit not your life, but all of ours and everything in creation.
Gosh, I'm so glad you added that. That's so, so important. I go down to the ocean every night and I talk to her, and I just, sometimes it's just a thank you, but yeah, like really, I love what you're speaking to, of opening up the lines of communication and somehow offering your affection or your, wow, that was just, and I'm really glad you felt strongly enough about it to say something.
Yeah.
Because then we're not, again, doing the colonization thing. Then we're participating in this
Yeah.
like beautiful dance.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not saying like don't ever post something on social media again, like, but I think you'll know, like, just there's certain moments that are just like, just keep your senses attuned to like why, maybe ask yourself like, why am I sharing? What's my motivation for sharing this?
Yeah,
That would be a good starting point. So,
totally. Yeah.
because I know I made the mistakes. I shared all the time because I personally needed affirmation.
Yeah.
Before I shared that all the time. And fortunately, I mean, I still have the impulse sometimes, and most of the time not. I don't have that impulse now, so that's good. Feel good about that. But and then have compassion for yourself when you catch yourself like, oh wow, like I'm going to share this thing that maybe shouldn't be shared because it's really sacred, because I need some attention right now. And then just have some compassion for yourself for that, and give yourself the attention, or find it. Ask another human, like, can you give me something? Could you give me a hug or something? Like, it's like we've gotten to this thing with social media in particular, where our relationships with the virtual world are like taking the place for actual connection and vulnerability with humans, and with humans and the rest of the world as well. it's like, I think we need to work on that.
Yes, I agree 1,000%. It's taking away our ability to relate to each other.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, that's wow. Oh my gosh, we could just talk forever. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you so, so much. Can you let people know how to work with you? How can they find you? Maybe tell them a little bit about the Coracle. I know you guys just took off in the
Yeah.
boat on Sunday. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I won't, I think you'll probably link to my website in the notes to this, but I have a website, it's jenniferlighty.com. And I also have a Substack called the Corpus Callosum Chronicles. It's jenlighty.substack.com. But that's also on my website. I work with people in a vessel called the coracle. And a coracle, if you don't know, were the old skin boats of Europe. It's a
Mm,
curragh in Irish and Gaelic. So their boats are literally made of seal skins. And I just thought the metaphor was so incredible when you think about the human body as a vessel and that we're encased in skin and that the
mm,
goal is to become buoyant on the waters of life. Um,
mm,
and so I have the coracle is an initiatory journey through folktales and myth and with elements of the Mu Hawaiian magic that we've been referring to that structure it. So I'm not teaching anything about the Hawaiian culture. There's a structure that I acknowledge because that's the proper thing to do, that this structure's there. And I'm sharing it with the permission from Keone. And the journey moves people into the places in beginning with the journey of safety and belonging, where their wounds, their primal wounds are about safety on an inner level through the images and the stories.
mm,
And then we move through there, refining that and like
mhm.
providing like a cellular healing through hearing stories that move be out of that. So everything is like working through the images in the stories. And it's an online offering that I do with people. And it goes all the way through like three journeys through the feminine and then the masculine and then into the androgynous, the Amakua, the union of the two, all through mythology and folk tales. So, like, yeah, I know it's a
Wow.
lot. It's a little bit hard to comprehend how it works, but it works. So,
I
it's
believe it. I
incredible.
totally
Really,
believe it. That's amazing. Yeah. At some point, I'm having a logo design because you mentioned the masculine and the feminine. I have to show it to you because it's all about because I'm so deeply impressed and I don't know what the right word is, impacted, I guess, by Keone's teachings as well. And so this whole masculine, feminine, and then, or feminine, masculine, and then the ascended self. And anyway, at some point, I'll show you the logo. It pulls them all together. I think it's beautiful that he's sharing this with us and we get to add our own remembrance to it, but also continue to share. Thank you for sharing your program with us.
thank
And
you. I just think you're so wonderful, sister.
oh, that
Yeah,
means so much to me.
really a
Uh,
pleasure. Like you just light up everything.
oh,
I feel
same.
you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to let that like fully penetrate my
Yeah.
masculine heart. Thank you. Like you've dropped some serious EK this morning, some serious wisdom, and opened up such a wealth of just contemplation for us all. I'm really excited to see the feedback and everything from this, and I want to thank you for fully bringing exactly who you are and sharing your story and yourself with us so generously.
Oh, honestly, it was such a pleasure, to like get to this point in my life where I have the voice to speak, and to like say all these things and to have people that want to receive what I have to say is just it's everything I ever wanted in my life. And I could not be more grateful to you for offering me this invitation.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Amazing. All right. Everybody, we love you so much, and we will see you next time. Yeah. Aloha.
Aloha.